Hi, entrepreneurship. My name is Lindsay Bryan Podvin, and I'm going to be taking you through this workshop on how to overcome money shame in entrepreneurship. So, in this workshop, I will cover my entrepreneurship story. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between guilt and shame, talk about how shame shows up in entrepreneurship, and different ways to move through shame. So, before we get started, I think it's helpful just to know a little bit about who I am and who is presenting to you. So, my entrepreneurship story started a long time ago. I am half Filipina. My biological mother is white. My biological father is Filipino. My parents had me very young and did not stay together. So, I did not meet my biological father, who's Filipino, until I was a senior in high school. I was raised with my biological mother and the man that she married, and he legally adopted me, which is why I don't have a Filipino surname. I grew up with four other siblings who, as you can tell from this picture, are all white. And I spent a lot of time as a child kind of wondering why I felt a little bit off, a little isolated, and I couldn't really pinpoint my identity. I grew up not only in a white family, but in a town that was 98.7% white. So when I tried to figure out who, this little brown girl was, I ended up accidentally appropriating a lot of others' cultures. I leaned on Spanish culture, I leaned on Latinx culture to try and figure out who I was. And it wasn't really until I was older that I understood what it meant to be Filipina. My biological dad and I met, as I mentioned, when I was a senior in high school, and we've cultivated a good relationship. And in 2009, we did go to the Philippines together and went to the place where my grandmother was born and baptized. And that was really healing and powerful. And now I'm comfortable connecting to my roots without having to be perfect. For a long time, I felt a lot of imposter syndrome because I didn't speak Tagalog. I didn't know how to make lumpia. And the reality is, as I've connected with more people across the diaspora, I realize my story isn't that different. And we share a lot of similarities of wondering where we belong because we have such a large diaspora population. Now, how am I qualified to talk to you all about money shame? I'm a social worker. I was trained in depression and anxiety and spent a lot of time as a mental health therapist in that space. And over time, I realized that there was such a need to talk about money in a way that wasn't just about budgeting and spreadsheets. So I sought out additional training in financial social work and financial therapy, and I got my certificate in May of 2018, and that's when I really launched on my entrepreneurship journey. I was starting to see clients. Because it is such a unique niche, I knew I had to get online and expand my reach, and that's exactly what I did, and I created Mind Money Balance. So let's get into guilt versus shame. The big differentiators between the two, even though we often use these terms interchangeably, is that guilt is really, I did something bad, I made a mistake, and shame, we really internalize and we identify with it as though I am bad. So sometimes guilt can become shame. You made a mistake, and then you start thinking, I am that mistake. And sometimes guilt can exist in and of itself. And shame can come up in a lot of ways, especially from, marginalized communities, as women, as entrepreneurs. Culture is often telling us that we don't belong. So shame is more often coming up for us. So we have layers of shame. And we're all familiar with the shame spiral. This happens to all of us, right? So the shame spiral is what happens when we do something we're ashamed of. We start to beat ourselves up, which then furthers the depths of shame that we feel, and it kicks up other things that we're ashamed of, right? If we think about this idea of marbles in a jar when it comes to anything, shame, trust, etc., it's not one thing that fills up that jar. It's these little things over time. So when we think of shame, when we put that marble in the jar of I did something bad and now I am bad, that then kind of goes in this jar of shame, and we go, oh my gosh, here are all the other examples of times where I did something I'm embarrassed of or ashamed of. So when we feel shame, it triggers this history in our mind's eye of all the other things we've done that we are guilty about or ashamed of. As I mentioned earlier, shame is so uncomfortable for us because it's tied to our identity. Whereas with other emotions, we can separate them from who we are. So you can feel angry, and it's easier to say, I felt anger, instead of taking on, I am an angry person. Now, does that happen? Of course, but it's pretty easy for us to separate out those other emotions, whereas shame is really, really, it gets layered on to our identity. And the shame spiral was first talked about in 92 by Gershon Kaufman. So let's talk about a non-money shame spiral, just so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. You trip over your dog and you yell at him. Your thoughts become, oh my gosh, I'm such a terrible dog mom. My dog deserves better. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. I'm such a jerk. Oh, this is just like the time that I snapped at my husband for no reason. So then you put this in your mental bank, and that mental jar is yet another time where you're a bad person. Now, when it comes to entrepreneurship, let's take a look at how this might show up. You launch a new product, and not only does it do worse than you thought, you're now out a bunch of money because you hardly sold any units. Your thoughts become, I'm such an idiot. I'll never be able to pay back these vendors. This is exactly what my former colleagues warned me about. I can't believe I didn't sign a contract. I might as well just give up. Now, there are 3 things, according to Brené Brown, that make shame worse: secrecy, silence, and judgment. Secrecy is hiding money shame from yourself or others. So for example, shredding your credit card statements so your partner doesn't see them. In today's online world, it might be just deleting those Amex alerts or Chase alerts when they come up. Silence is avoiding discussing the incident that is causing shame, shutting down thinking about it, or changing the subject. For example, when somebody asks you how a recent launch went, you nervously laugh, you don't respond, and then you bring the conversation back to them. And then finally, judgment. This is where blame and shoulding yourself and being really unkind to yourself come in. So for example, thinking you should have known better getting into a commercial lease. And the judgment is really harsh because it also layers on this idea that somehow you deserve the bad thing that happened to you. Now, what makes shame better? Naming it, empathy and compassion, social support, and education. So as you can imagine, all of those things are complicated when it comes to money shame because we do not talk about money. There are layers of our money story informed by our families, our culture, our education, our neighborhood, our religion, and more. So it makes it really hard to move through some of these things that can help our money shame because money is already such a secret topic. So it makes it really hard to talk about when we've made a money mistake or when we feel bad about something financially. I want to go back to this actually for a second and share a little story of my own money shame, right? I'm a financial therapist. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been doing this for a little while. I feel fairly savvy when it comes to money stuff. But as I pivoted my business to online, like many people, I turned to Google, I turned to Instagram. I was trying to find inspiration for really how to run an online business. And as we all know, there are kind of 3 buckets of people that come up when we are searching for online business help. One is the bro marketer, which is pretty easy to spot, right? He's the person who's like, hustle harder, outsource, 5x your income, right? That kind of stuff felt really sleazy to me, so it's pretty easy to skip over. The next one is the multi-level marketing, which again felt pretty easy to skip over for me because it didn't resonate with me. I didn't want to build my business based on somebody else's business. I know plenty of people who do and are successful at it, but I knew for me that wasn't what I wanted. I really wanted to be definitely my own boss and sell my own products or services. So that one was also easy to skip over. The final one is one that I got sucked into, and there's so much shame tied up in it because I felt like I should have seen it. And that is the Kelly Deals is a feminist copywriter, and she has dubbed this the female lifestyle empowerment brand, which is really bro marketing, but underneath a millennial pink brand, right? So it is a lot of the bro marketing techniques, but they're subtler, they're pinker, they're more glittery, and they are easier to fall into. And I fell into that female lifestyle empowerment brand by hiring coaches, buying courses, doing all of these trainings and webinars, and getting PDFs. And before I knew it, I realized I had spent a lot of money on these things that were not producing results in my business. Why? Because it wasn't aligned with who I am and how I want to run a business. And when I had that aha moment, it was late spring of 2020, I felt so much shame. I was beating myself up. How could I have done this? How could I have fallen for these traps? What was wrong with me? Here I am supposed to be a financial therapist. I'm supposed to be savvy enough to see this, and I didn't. And I really crawled into a hole. And there were lots of days of sobbing, lots of days of feeling like a failure, lots of days of wanting to give up. And it took me really peeling back the layers of why I was so susceptible to that marketing, and starting to forgive myself and starting to remind myself that I am qualified to do this work, even if I don't do it in the way that these marketers were telling me that I had to do it. And that money shame is not one and done. It's not like, oh, I had a beautiful release ceremony and I never feel shame again. No, of course it pops up. But the reason that I was able to move through it at a relatively quick pace, all things considered, like I said, my kind of aha moment was April, May of 2020, was that I had a lot of these things that I'm going to take you through in place to make it such that I was able to move through my money shame a little bit quicker. So let's talk about the ways that you can help your money shame. First of all is just naming it, just labeling it. Whether you state your shame out loud, it could be to a friend, a partner, a therapist, journaling it. I have actually found a lot of success personally with breath work, which is a very specific type of breathing that I don't know enough about it, but if you Google breath work, you will find some amazing practitioners, and I'm sure you can hire an entrepreneur who is a breath worker. But it also helps to facilitate emotional release. So you have to identify it. And there's something really healing and cathartic about labeling what has happened. Here's how you do it. First, identify the scenario. What's going on that's causing you guilt or shame? The scenario is, I didn't sell as many products as I was hoping. Then you name the shame. This made me feel like a business failure. And if you're struggling with this, the formula you can try is right now, this thing is happening and I feel this emotion. So right now, I didn't sell as many products and I feel bummed out because it made me feel like a business failure. Now let's layer onto that. Naming it is one step, but we also have to add on empathy. Empathy offers a kind, realistic, and adaptive viewpoint of the scenario. Now, compassion and empathy are also often interchanged in our language, but they are a little bit different in that empathy is more kind of understanding the full scenario and offering, a non-judgmental reflection of it. Whereas compassion is also like that, but it also adds a desire of action. It also offers like a next step or a desire to help. So when we take on naming it and then we add empathy, here's how you do it. First, you identify the scenario. I didn't sell as many products as I was hoping. Name the shame. This made me feel like a business failure. Empathy. Even though I didn't sell as many products as I'd hoped, I got good feedback from customers about what they want to see, and my other products are still selling well. That's the empathy component right there, is the kind, realistic, and adaptive viewpoint of the scenario. it is real. It is real that you didn't sell as many products as you want. And it's also kind and adaptive to say, and I got some really good feedback about why this particular product didn't work. I got some good feedback about what my customers or consumers really want. And that helps to frame it in the lens of a mistake isn't a failure. A mistake is an opportunity to learn. But so many of us, jump straight to, I'm a failure, I made a mistake, instead of going, where is the silver lining here? And you'll notice that I'm not teaching you to say, skip over the reality of what happened. That's the problem with a lot of affirmations, which we'll get into in a moment, is that a lot of positive affirmations are rooted in toxic positivity, which don't allow you to acknowledge the frustration or disappointment that you felt. So for example, let's say you went to a friend and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't sell as many products as I was hoping. And they jump right to, that's okay, you're amazing. They miss out on that bridge between meeting you where you are and saying, oh, that's such a bummer, right? Acknowledging what had happened. I'm so sorry that happened. And then moving on to, and you're still a good business owner, and you still have the opportunity for success. So we have to be careful with affirmations that we don't jump too far ahead, because it kind of creates this emotional whiplash for your brain that's hard to keep up with. So we have to build that bridge between, for all intents and purposes, between sad and happy. We have to build that bridge for our brain. Otherwise, those affirmations just don't feel authentic and our brain will reject them. Excuse me, one moment. It's hard talking for 30 minutes straight. You got to take care of your vocal cords, your health. All right, so we talked about empathy. Now, what do we do when we layer on compassion? We can take what we've learned and implement it moving forward. So that is how we can use empathy to cope with money, shame, and entrepreneurship. Now, as I mentioned, self-compassion is incredibly important. So self-compassion has become really buzzy over these past few years, but really self-compassion is being kind to yourself without gaslighting yourself, while allowing yourself to feel all of the feelings. Excuse me. All right. So some self-compassion affirmations that you can try are, my mistakes do not define me, and they help me to understand more about where I'm going. I accept both the strengths and the shadows of myself. Change is the only constant. I'm able to learn when I'm kind to myself. I think all of us in 2020 have really awoken to the reality that our lives are constantly changing. They are constantly evolving and constantly moving. Prior to 2020, I think a lot of us fell into this illusion that somehow we could predict the future, that somehow we knew what was coming. And by acknowledging that the change is constant, and once we can kind of go with that flow, it can be really helpful. But again, a hallmark is being kind to yourself as you accept and acknowledge the change. Another one is, this is a moment of, insert the painful emotion. This is a moment of suffering. This is a moment of hurt. This is a moment of discomfort. May I be kind to myself during this time. I'm working on accepting the human parts of myself, and my debt does not define me. I'm working on a repayment plan. Now, if you have other affirmations that you really love, or you have affirmations that you want to love, but you just can't get on board with them, I'm going to give you a little trick here. And it is just adding on, I'm working toward, may I someday, at the beginning of that affirmation. So for example, if you want to really love this affirmation of, I expand in abundance every day, but it doesn't quite feel right, you can tack on some of those modifiers to the beginning, which are, I am working on expanding in abundance every day, right? Because what that does is, again, helps build that bridge for our brain, and it makes it so that affirmation doesn't feel so cheesy. When I hear people say, affirmations, mantras are cheesy, to me, it's because they're using something that feels really big and feels maybe far away for them, versus giving their brain a bridge to get on board with that affirmation. So let's try another one. I am an amazing business owner. If your brain isn't there yet, you can work on each day I'm striving towards being an amazing business owner. That again helps your brain get on board and say, oh, I can get behind that. I can really believe that each day I'm improving step by step, little by little. So I hope that helps if you have struggled with affirmations or mantras in the past. Another thing that helps us with shame is social support. Talking about shame, including financial shame, in a safe group setting helps to normalize the experience. It helps to say, you aren't alone. I've been through this. We've been through this. This is a part of the entrepreneurial growth. It helps to validate how you feel by someone saying, oh, that's really hard. Oh, I'm so sorry that happened. And it offers social recognition of the pain or shame. Let me take another example from psychology. So what we know about grief is that a hallmark component of a healthy grief process is social recognition of the loss, which is why we have funerals when somebody passes away. Because if we didn't have that social recognition of the loss, we would be doing this in private and in secrecy. And as we know, going back a few slides ago, that is what really cultivates an environment of shame. Now, I'm not saying when somebody passes that you feel shame, but you might feel like, oh, I need some support here. And that is why when it comes to grief and loss, all cultures across the world have some sort of death passage or death ritual. So again, when we come back to money shame, offering social recognition of what you've gone through is so important in healing that shame wound. Education. One of the biggest parts of shame is not, when it comes to money shame, is not understanding or not wanting to look at your business financials, right? You're like, if I don't look at my revenue and expenses, then it's not happening, or you don't want to know how much business debt you've taken on, or you don't want to look at how many units you've sold. It's a temporary protection for your brain to not know what's happening. But what we know is that education is the final pillar in really helping you to feel comfortable with what's going on in your business. You must understand the basics of entrepreneurship financially. You are not, maybe you are. Actually, let me take this back. I was going to say you're not a nonprofit, you're not a charity, but you might be. And even if you are a nonprofit or a charity or a philanthropic organization, you have to be bringing in money in order for it to be sustainable. Nonprofit doesn't mean operating at a loss. It means that you aren't in the business of profiting, but you still have to bring in enough money to pay for the overhead of the office you rent, to pay the employees who are there, who are spreading awareness. You need to pay for those things, right? Things cost money. So even if you are a nonprofit or a charity, you still need to know the financials of your business. Now, if you're an entrepreneur who is not in charity or nonprofits, we definitely need to understand what's going on. When you're a sole proprietor or a very small company and you're first starting out, kind of doing all the things, here are some of the basics that you definitely need to know. Cash flow, how much money are you bringing in, aka revenue, how much is going out, aka expenses. What is left over after that equation is your earnings or your profit. We want to be earning more money every month or profiting every month in order to stay in business. The other thing you need to think about is taxes. I'm more familiar with the United States and Canada's tax models because, I live in Michigan, I live in the US. Canada's tax structure is really similar to the United States for entrepreneurs. In the United States, you have to pay taxes quarterly. In Canada, you have to pay them annually. But either way, you still have to set aside money to pay those taxes. So many people get into entrepreneurship and they go, oh my gosh, I saw that I sold this $20 product and I profited $18. All $18 are mine. Nope, the tax man cometh. You have to pay your taxes. Taxes are an important structure of a functioning society, and it's a price we pay as business folks. Quite frankly, I happily pay my taxes to know that I'm contributing to my community. As an entrepreneur, I'm not just here to make money for myself, but one hallmark for me of being an entrepreneur and growing my revenue and growing my income is the ability to give back locally and nationally. It may be globally too, right? But taxes to me are just a component of that. So I think it's helpful to do that little reframe when you do have to pay your taxes. The other thing is you have to pay yourself. Some of my entrepreneurs, I see them kind of hoarding their money. They want to keep it all in their business bank account. They're really scared to pay themselves, or they pay everybody else first. They pay their software company. They pay their virtual assistant. They pay everybody else before they pay themselves. You must start to figure out a way to pay yourself. And finally, when it comes to business financials, you have to be able to invest in your future. That might look like investing in a retirement account. Again, I'm in the United States, so some of the jargon is different, but it's things like a solo 401k, a SEP, which is a self-employment pension plan, which is a terrible name for it because it is not a pension, an IRA, an individual retirement account. You have to invest in some of those things if you want to invest in your retirement. And you also need to be investing in your future outside of just retirement. So that might look like setting aside money every year to take on a business development, to hire somebody in business development. It might look like hiring an ethical business coach. If you are in the medical field like me and you have to take continuing education credits, it might be setting aside money to make sure that you can afford to stay on top of your continuing ed. Those are different ways that you can invest in your future, but you want to make sure that your business is supporting you to do so. So those are the big things when it comes to money, is understanding it. It seems really overwhelming. So just start with those 4: cash flow, taxes, paying yourself, and investing in your future. And again, it might seem a little bit overwhelming, but there are some amazing entrepreneurs that I have met who work in the business finance space that you can work with or hire to learn more about your business and or outsource it. Now, the caveat here that I always like to say, if you are outsourcing things like accounting, bookkeeping, profit planning, all of that is fine to outsource. And I highly recommend you have at least a basic understanding of what it is that they're doing. Of course, they're the professionals. They're going to do it probably more effectively than you, no offense. But what is really important is for you to have a good understanding of what's going on in your business. That helps us to be empowered in our relationship with money. And again, it helps to dial down that shame when we can confidently say, hey, this is where my money is going. Cool? So let's recap. You guys did amazing. Thank you so much for sticking through this. Money shame is common, but just because something is common doesn't mean it's okay. When you experience money shame, I want for you to remind yourself of this presentation and ask yourself, are you doing some of the things that make shame worse, or are you doing some of the things that make shame better? As a reminder, secrecy, silence, and judgment make money shame worse. Naming it, empathy and compassion, social support, and education all decrease the intensity of shame. I hope that you found this presentation helpful. If you want to learn more about me, you can find me. My business, again, is called Mind Money Balance. I'm on Instagram probably way too much, so you can follow me there. My podcast, Mind Money Balance, is of the same name, and my website is also of the same name. I look forward to connecting with all of you beautiful, amazing, powerful entrepreneurs.